Item number 5 on the agenda is a special presentation about home rule. And I would like to introduce, we have an expert here. She is with our law firm, the City Legal Counsel of Ansel, Glink, DeCiani, and Krafteffer.
Very good.
And so she is our legal expert, and she's going to give a presentation on what home rule is and what it is not, and what we as council members and city staff members may do and may not do. And then we're going to open, when she's done with her presentation, we're going to open it up for questions from the commissioners. And then when we're done, we will open up for questions from anyone in the audience that has any questions. Now, I just want to be sure that everybody understands the ground rules on what we're doing here during this presentation. It's to answer your questions on what home rule means. It's not to get into a debate at this time. It's not to have opinions at this time, whether you're for it or against it. The next item on the agenda is citizens' comments, and you will have an opportunity to speak whether you're for or against it or debate it or whatever you want to do at that point. So I just want to be sure that everybody understands that this is to provide information only on what home rule is for her presentation. So go ahead.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me out here tonight. It's nice to see such a large group come out here for this. So one of the things that our law firm does is we educate public officials and public bodies and just members of the public generally on different legal issues related to units of local government. We represent around 300 units of local government in the state and about 50 municipalities. And right now, this issue of home rule, even as you know from just being out in this area generally, is kind of a hot topic, which is interesting because it's kind of cyclical. Sometimes we hear about people turning home rule, and then we hear about people abusing home rule powers. And so I want to kind of give you an overview of what it is and what it's not, and if you want to go forward and maybe try to get it, what you can do. But I'm going to start tonight with this is going to be a law school class, okay? You probably didn't sign up for this part, but in order to understand the powers that a government can exercise, I just want to talk a little bit about the framework for that. So we're going to start with a principle called Dillon's rule. And Dillon's rule was first expressed in 1868 by an Iowa Supreme Court justice. And he said basically, and these aren't his exact words, but he said, hey, if a government is going to exercise a power, that power has to come from somewhere. So there's now a rule that has originated called Dillon's rule, and it really just stands for that proposition, that if you want to exercise a governmental power, in our instance, in Illinois, for example, the Illinois General Assembly will have had to have given us a law that allows a public body to exercise that power. So when our 1970 Constitution was drafted, there was a section in it that was added that says that units of local government shall only have powers granted by law. So that kind of embraced Dillon's rule there. But there was a special thing, a special power that was crafted into that Constitution, which was contained in Article 7, Section 6 of the Constitution. And what it said is we're going to have some special units of government which are called home rule governments. And that's available to any municipality that has over 25,000 in population. Or if your municipality elects by referendum to become home rule, you can have an election and let the voters vote for that. And so really those are the two ways that you can become home rule. But what is home rule? So if you are a non-home rule unit of local government, you can only exercise those powers where you can point to a law or a statute that allows you to do that. If you are home rule, it's the opposite of that. You can exercise a power unless the General Assembly has preempted home rule, which means there's a law saying that you can't regulate it, for example. So, except as limited, if you are a home rule body, you can exercise any power or function related to government, which sometimes include the power to regulate different things related to public health, safety, morals, welfare, and to license, to tax, and to incur debt. Now, There are limits to home rule, though, because otherwise, any municipality could just adopt whatever kind of law they wanted, and that would really result in chaos throughout the state if people had different vehicle licensing laws than the state had and things like that. So we have different limits on home rule power. So home rule units can't do certain things. They can't incur certain types of debt. They can't define and provide for punishments of felonies. And they only have the abilities given by the General Assembly to punish and imprison for up to 6 months for certain crimes, and to license for revenue or impose taxes upon or measured by income or by certain occupations. So let's just stop for a minute and talk about that, because really, I don't want to get too far in the weeds when it comes to all these hyper-technical legalities, because really, usually what people are interested about when we talk about home rule and why people come to meetings like this is because municipalities want to have the ability to provide property tax relief to their constituents, and that's a really tough thing in Illinois right now, especially when we have governments who are called upon to provide increasing level of services, and we also have the state trying to take away some of the funds that have traditionally come into the municipalities, like local government distributive fund, and we also have a lot of unfunded mandates that the state requires cities to provide. So they'll say, you have to do this and you have to do that, and we're not going to give you the ability to either raise taxes or provide additional services. So sometimes why municipalities want to become home rule is to explore other options to get revenue into the city aside from property taxes. And I know in Zion particularly, there's a clamor for property tax relief that the city is taking pretty seriously. So that's one of the reasons that the city just wants to see if this is a power that's available to them. And I want to just kind of read through a list here of different powers that a home rule municipality can exercise related to taxation, so that everybody can kind of understand why it might be appealing, because it's a way to bring revenue into the city. Sometimes it's not just on the heels of the residents. It might be if people are coming in town to use services here or have businesses here, things like that. So municipalities can impose tax. They can't impose an income tax, so it's not going to be that, and they can't impose an occupation tax, but they can impose sales taxes and use taxes, inheritance taxes, motor vehicle taxes, tobacco product taxes, hotel motel taxes, per capita head taxes, which are usually imposed on different businesses in town, leasing taxes, admission taxes, wheel taxes, gasoline taxes and use taxes, amusement taxes, alcoholic beverage taxes, real estate transfer taxes, and exemptions of certain property within special service areas from taxes that they might otherwise have to pay. So they can actually impose tax relief in certain instances, and they can also, in certain instances, have special assessments in order to make local improvements. Now, for those of you who are trying to take notes, I will make this information in my PowerPoint, which I'm reading from, available, so the city can put that on their website or otherwise distribute it, and that'll be available after tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about taking close notes about this.
Just so everybody knows, this will probably be on the city's website, the entire council meeting tomorrow, and I've asked Gibby if he would pull this section out that we can get posted on the local Zion Community Forum and I Heart Zion, so that there'll be opportunities to, if you're taking notes, there'll be opportunities to see this as many times as you want. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. And then in addition to powers that home rule municipalities can exercise related to taxes, they also have powers with respect to elections. If they want to, for example, have nonpartisan elections, if they want to hold a referendum for runoff elections, these aren't things that the municipality would do without the voice of the people, though. So these aren't just things, these would also require additional referendum. And they can also change their rules of order to vote in a particular manner. They also have some abilities related to personnel. They can extend probationary periods for employees or limit tenure rights. They have the ability to change the clerk from an elective office to an appointive office by ordinance. They can change the number of trustees and the terms of office by ordinance. They have the ability to combine police and fire departments or to require police officers to participate in a police pension fund. And then they also have certain powers that can be executed with respect to building and zoning. They can regulate subdivision drainage, parking requirements, enact and enforce building codes. And some of these, I mean, they're already doing through laws that are permitted by the state, but it just gives them greater flexibility in doing that. They also have unlimited power to incur debt payable from other sources other than property taxes. And that, I mean, so that's kind of a broad-based summary of the different powers that can be exercised by a municipality that is home rule. Now, so let's see here. So basically, with respect to governmental structure, if there are changes that they want to make, subject to approval by referendum to change the structure of the government and to provide for officers, manners in terms of selection, things like that. And then there's a lot of limitations. And I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time going through the limitations because the limitations already exist by law. So what that means is that if there's something that the city wants to do where the state has preempted it, they're not going to be able to exercise that power. Now, one of the things that the Constitution permits is that we have a broad construction of home rule powers so that the state is trying to enable home rule municipalities to do what it is that they want to do. And in fact, the Illinois Municipal League has a committee of home rule attorneys, so they meet on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, to try to determine what is it that governments need to be able to do where they're being crippled by the state from doing it. So that is something that there's an ongoing dialogue about, and you can exist outside of the framework of non-home rule municipalities. So now, what if the city decides that they want to become home rule? What is the process for that? Well, the first thing that they need to do is they would pass a resolution to place a question on the ballot. Now, the last day to put a resolution on the ballot for the November election was yesterday. So this is off the table for the November election. So if this is going to happen, if the city wants to consider this.
We already did that.
Oh, you already did it?
Yes, we did a resolution.
Oh, you did it? Oh, okay, all right, so it's on there for that. I'm sorry, I thought it was still before that. Okay, all right, so that's on the ballot, all right. So what rules apply then about campaigning? Well, the same rules apply about campaigning for a home rule referendum as apply for other referenda, which is that the Illinois Constitution has a bar that you cannot use public funds for private purposes. So the city cannot campaign for or against home rule officially as a city council. And that also is buffered by a prohibition in the Illinois Election Code that you can't use public funds to urge any voter to vote for or against a candidate or a proposition. And we also have other laws that regulate ethics in Illinois. And one of those laws is the State Officials and Employees Ethics Act. And that basically says that no governmental employee shall intentionally perform any prohibited political activity while they're on compensated time. So the city can't use city officials or city employees to go out during the workday and campaign for home rule or against home rule, and that's the same law that applies to any kind of candidate or referendum, not specifically just home rule. The only thing is that if a city employee wants to use their compensated time off, like if they have a vacation day that they're getting paid for, and they want to use that day to go out and campaign, they would be able to do that, just as anyone would be able to do on their paid vacation time. Now, prohibited political activity includes just about anything you could think of relating to campaigning. So it would be anything related to campaigning or soliciting funds for or against a referendum. And there is a specific list in the Ethics Act of things that you can't do. They can't attend political meetings on paid time. Now, one question that we often get about this is, well, what does that mean when you apply that to elected officials who receive nominal compensation for the roles that they're performing? can they speak for or against it if they don't really have set hours? Yes, they can. Just because someone's an elected official doesn't mean that they lose their First Amendment right to have an opinion on something. So they can campaign whenever they want. They can go out and they can talk to people and say, support this or vote against this or whatever they want to do. And that's not an issue because that's not really covered by this same law that will cover what an employee is doing on compensated time. So back to what the employees cannot do. They can't solicit contributions while they're on paid work time. They can do all of this off-duty if they really feel passionate about an issue, of course. They can't conduct public opinion polls. They can't survey voters. They can't assist in the polls on election day if that's a work day for them. If it's a day that they're taking off, they can serve as an election judge or work in the polls. They can't solicit votes, circulate petitions on compensated work time, distribute campaign literature, anything like that. So compensated time is any time that counts towards minimum work time, which doesn't include holidays or leave time, and as I discussed, it also does not include paid sick or vacation time. However, there is something that the city can do, and that is they can distribute information about what home rule means and what it does not mean. So I'm here today. I'm a part of an information campaign. I'm not telling you to vote for it or against it. I'm just educating you. And the city can likewise put out publications and materials informing voters, this is what home rule means, this is what it doesn't mean. And they can also specify this could be a potential consequence if we don't get it, as long as it's factual. It can't be like lobbying or advancing a political agenda. And there's a specific section of the election code which actually says that the part that limits the expenditure of public funds doesn't apply to the use of public funds for dissemination of factual information. Now, off-duty, officials and employees can do or say whatever they want to about a referendum or a candidate, and officials can advocate for or against a referendum as long as they are not on municipal property, holding themselves out as officers or employees on compensated time. Now, there's a whole body of law related to what can be done on public property related to campaigning. And basically, the city has the ability to establish a designated public forum where people can say or do whatever they want to do. Like if they want to have people passing out literature, whether it's the Chinese food restaurant menu or campaign, they can do that as long as it's outside of, well, they can designate on public property where that will be. And on election day, we have other special rules that apply if this is a polling place. And if there's a polling place, you can't engage in campaigning or electioneering within 100 feet of where polling is occurring. Although people can put campaign signs and things like that on public property outside of that limitation during an election day. So how can we advocate for a referendum if we actually do feel this is something good for the city? We can do that off-duty when we're not on paid time. We can do that as a private citizen because everybody has their First Amendment rights. And sometimes what happens is that, and you see this a lot with park districts, they have foundations that are created, Friends of the Park, because if it's a political action committee or not-for-profit foundation, they have the ability to raise funds that they can then expend on advocacy if they want. If it's not-for-profit, they have to watch out that they don't cross that line into political advocacy, which would turn them into a political action committee. But that's how a lot of times public bodies do get referenda passed, by working through those kind of organizations. Now, we have been consulting municipalities about home rule for a long, long time. One of our clients, the Village of Lisle, was home rule, and they ultimately voted to not be home rule because they didn't like the home rule powers once they got it, so the electors took that away. But we have had several that have wanted to be home rule, and they've asked us, well, what are the elements of a successful home rule campaign? How come it works in some communities and how come it doesn't work in others? And what we found is that in communities where it's successful, there's usually three elements that are present. First of all, there's significant trust in governmental officials. Now, these days, there's not a lot of trust in governmental officials on a statewide basis. But on a local level, you know, it really has to do with your elected officials and what they're trying to do, and whether or not they're communicating with the public and whether or not they're accountable for their actions. So one element is that there is an amount of trust between the citizens and the governing body. The second is that there's a clear communication about what home rule powers will be used for if they're successful. And a lot of times, people will say, look, we want to have these, and for example, a long time ago in the city of Bloomingdale, they wanted a golf course, so they wanted to be home rule because they wanted to raise the funds for a golf course, and they could impose a tax on that if it came to town. So they were very clear about what they wanted to use their powers for. So instead of saying, well, we want to have home rule powers and we're just kind of dabble in them, I think what I would urge the city to do, that if you are going to embark upon this, is try to go through the laundry list of what I read and narrow it down to say, if we had these powers, this is what we would use them for. And then we have to communicate that to the public, to say this is what we're going to use them for, this is why we want to have them. We're trying to provide some property tax relief to our residents here, and we're trying to use our taxing powers, for example, in other areas that aren't going to have the burden borne solely by the residents of Zion, things like that. But there's a clear articulation of what it's used for. And then the third element of a successful home rule referenda is that there has to be a widespread informational campaign as to what it means and what it doesn't mean. Because as with anything, what happens is that, what do you read about in the news? The bad apples, right? So there have been some municipalities that had home rule powers and then used it for things that the residents never expected it would be used for, and you hear that public outcry. So there's a lot of fear many times when people hear about people wanting to have home rule powers. So, and it's a legitimate fear because people have heard about that fear. So that's the third element. Just have information about what it's going to be used for, and then have that accountability too when it does come in place, that you only use it for what you said that you would use it for. So there you have it, kind of Home Rule 101, a general overview of it, but I'm willing to answer any questions that any of you have about this.
The commissioners have any questions?
Yeah. Carrie Lynn, this is an open session. I understand that we really can't meet in closed session to talk about this. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm going to have to I'll be asking questions then, and if I'm close to crossing a line of things that shouldn't be said, you please stop me.
Okay.
Okay. So one thing that attracts me about home rule is that there are 177 legislators in Springfield, only 2 of which represent our community, and actually only partially because they have broader districts. So all the powers that you just listed here, the taxing powers and all those things, Springfield already has. And these are in the hands of legislators that may or may not know us and may or may not have other communities that are asking them to do things. And I think one of the real advantages of home rule is that the people out here have elected us to represent them. We're the people that you see in the grocery store. We're the people that you see at church. We're the people that you see in the park listening to concerts, things like that. So we rub shoulders every day. We're in communication with each other. And yes, you are giving some broad powers to elected officials in this city, but they're people that you know, people that live in your community and that are also affected by the statutes and the ordinances that we make. We feel it too. Is that something that can be said publicly in a brochure or so? You didn't stop me, so I just kept going.
Well, you're not really advocating for home rule. You're just pointing out that one of the benefits is that it's the exercise of local control.
Yeah.
So if, to the extent that that's a factual statement, that is information you could disseminate. I mean, if the city did decide it wanted to embark upon an informational campaign, we would normally review whatever you're planning to send out ahead of time to make sure that it's not crossing the line into political advocacy. But yes, I mean, that would allow you to exercise powers here, and it would allow the residents to have local accountability. I think that's why there's a lot of frustration with state government, because it's so far away, and they can't accost someone in a grocery store as they will be able to do out here if things go
Yeah.
wrong.
So what remedy do voters have? Let's say we put this on the ballot, it's approved, and the city council, maybe not this city council, but a future city council, starts adding this tax and that tax. What remedy do voters have to get rid of home rule?
They have the same thing that happened in the Village of Lisle. The voters have the ability to put it back on the ballot and take it back off.
What's the process for that? How do they do that?
I believe they could either come forward to the city and have the city put on a referendum to do it, or they could petition to do it. And I mean, I'm not up to date, I don't know what the, I haven't
All
looked
right,
at.
so they have to go to the county clerk's office, get a petition, and do they have to, in order to get a referendum on the ballot, you have to have a petition?
I really
to do
can't
that?
hear, because I'm getting words from coming up this way, talking here, so please.
There's
So-
a procedure, I guess.
Yeah, they would file it with the city clerk, and then the city clerk would certify the referendum to the county, and the county would put it on the ballot for the
Okay,
next
all
election.
right. So there is a way
Yes.
for that to happen.
My immediate response is that there's a way to,
And vote us out of office, too.
get them out of office. Absolutely.
Because essentially, we are the most accountable to the citizens of this city. So,
I've heard a couple questions on some of the specifics of it. One of the questions that's been raised is, would home rule affect the city of Zion's ability to deal with an individual's Second Amendment rights? Does that give us any power to do that? I think that's a fear of some people that I think there were references to Deerfield and Highland Park. And I want to be sure that that's answered.
Yes, not right now. There's not, I mean, I've given kind of the list of that. There are cases, I believe, that are percolating up challenging that, but, I mean, I don't believe right now that would be an appropriate exercise.
I think the state legislators preempted the ability of home rule communities to do that.
Yeah, and in many areas they have. I didn't prepare the list of everything that home rule municipalities cannot do.
There was also, we had talked, I think, when we were putting the resolution together about limiting our own power. Could we, the question came up is, can we put this question out there and say we would not raise property taxes any more than a normal, what we could do under the property tax gap? And is it true, I mean, the explanation that we got at that point was that, well, yeah, you can't put it on the question. The question is Zion going to be home rule? We could pass a resolution saying that we wouldn't do that, but the day after home rule was passed, we could flip that resolution and ignore it, or another city council could ignore it later on.
Well, that's true, but by the same token, you could adopt an ethics ordinance and then repeal it also. I mean, generally, people operate with a certain standard of ethics, especially if they have sought to be a public servant. So, yes, it's true, people can always abuse power, but, in this instance, I think if you wanted to hold yourself out with accountability and say, hey, this is why we're exploring home rule, and these are the parameters we're willing to live within and adopt that, you would be able to do that.
And then one of the other questions that came up, and I thought it was from something that you wrote, I think I read an article that you wrote, and I thought one of the last things in there says that we as elected officials cannot say, if this doesn't pass, these are going to be the horrible consequences of what's going to happen. Or we're going to have, fairy dust is going to be sprinkled on Zion and all is going to be well. We can't say things like that.
Well, you can't threaten retaliation. You can make factual statements about what would happen if you didn't have the ability to exercise home rule powers. And that's why, sometimes there's a fine line with respect to that.
You actually mentioned it,
Excuse me.
and if I'm crossing a line, please stop me. But one of the benefits of home rule is the ability to spread out the tax burden off of property taxes, because nobody wants their property taxes increased.
Thank you.
But if we have the ability to increase sales tax by 1%, or maybe it's 1.5, so what's the limit? There's a limit. I mean, we can't just increase sales tax 10%. We could increase sales tax by at least 1%. And that would give revenue that would save city jobs and provide city services that we would likely have to cut if we didn't have that revenue stream coming in. Is that something we can say?
As long as they're factual statements. I mean, that's why, I mean, I guess I
Well,
would
that's the
really.
plan. That's a plan. That's a way of saving city jobs, a way of providing city services by having that revenue source in sales tax coming in. Because we don't have any other tools available to us to create revenue, to save those jobs and to provide those city services at this time. There's future development projects and things like that, but that's in the future. If we don't have that revenue coming in, it's likely we'll have to cut city services.
So here, maybe this will make it a little more clear for you, okay? So the prohibition isn't on what you say, it's on expending public funds to say it, okay? So, I mean, I think that might answer your question. So if you believe as an elected official that the city is going to have to make certain cuts if you do not have home rule powers, you are entitled to say that. What the city can't do is send out something that says, vote yes, or we are going to do that, which I think was what my article was talking about that you referenced. So all of you have the ability to have your opinions one way or another with respect to that. And as long as we're not sending out city employees on paid time to deliver a certain message, that's fine. But if you want to walk around your community and make speeches and say things like that, you don't have to be afraid of saying that, because you still have your First Amendment rights to say whatever you want and to hold whatever opinions you want. So maybe that clarifies it a little more.
That helps a lot. Anything else from the commissioners on questions?
My question was, how would home rule impact crime-free housing? Or is that something that could be implemented within our community?
So there are special laws with respect to crime-free housing that, I'm just not, I think you would have the ability to adopt a scheme with respect to that, but what I'm not sure of is the interaction of the county related to that. So I don't know that offhand. I would have to find that out and get back to you.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of things have to be investigated, but right now we have nuisance abatement. But that is 3 calls to 1 address in a 6-month period. There's actually so much wiggle room in getting out of that type of nuisance abatement that it's very unlikely that, well, how many times have we actually enforced nuisance abatement?
I couldn't say off the top of my head, but we've had a couple of instances where it was so serious that we brought in the Attorney General's office and took it to that level to make the changes, the landlord had to make the necessary changes to bring those properties in compliance with what we expect.
So it's my understanding that would expedite that whole process. If we had an address in town that continually had criminal activity in the structure, we could address that immediately, instead of going through the nuisance abatement
Yes,
plan.
it gives you greater regulations on subdivision controls and zoning controls and code enforcement, for sure.
And I know we also have property that has a significant amount of liens on it. And I just asked Director Ianson earlier, how much money do we have outstanding in liens that have yet to be
Over the
collected?
years, it's well over $1 million.
Okay, so it's a lot of money that's sitting out there. And it's my understanding that home rule would allow the city to collect those liens first, instead of banks and mortgage companies and, other entities, but the city would be the first to collect on liens on property. That's my understanding.
Is the city already foreclosing on liens that it has?
Say that again?
Are you already, for the liens that you have, is the city already foreclosing on the liens? Okay, well, that's something we can explore with you, to go forward with that, but you're saying in the event that the property's foreclosed on?
Yeah.
Moving up on the priority chain? Yeah, but we can probably help you with
So these
some other
are
options.
non-property tax ways of the city to get money that's due the city, and allow us the ability to actually lower our levy.
Yeah, that's exactly why a lot of municipalities want home rule powers.
If we reached the point in negotiating with fire and police on their salaries and so forth, we're doing everything that we can to keep the employees, but our budget says, no, we can't do what we'd like to do because we're bound by what the union has to say. Is there anything that we, with home rule, could do to bypass the union?
No.
I knew that was a loaded question.
Are there any other questions?
I would just say that for the most part, the presentation covers most of the ins and outs of home rule. I've been reading quite a bit about it over the past few years, actually. And I know that this was something that when you were running, that you wanted us to explore. I think that it would be, the positives for the city would be very good. I think we can get a lot done. We just have to bring the facts to the voters and let them decide.
Okay, and Mr. Nabel, do you have the list of that Carrie put together on all the taxes and the things that you just read off here?
Yeah.
Could you make copies of, get 30 or 40 copies of that, or somebody get 30 or 40 copies so that the people out here can have it and they can, because that's a very extensive list and I don't think anybody really caught all that stuff, but they'll have the information. And so the commissioners have any more questions? Okay, then we're going to open it up for questions, just questions. Again, we're not going to get into a debate, but I've got a couple comments that I want to make as an introduction to how we got here. Because when I ran for office, there was absolutely no thought in my mind that we would be going to home rule and that we would be in a position that we are today that is requiring us to at least consider this and asking the citizens to consider it. And a couple of them were, I look at this as primarily three things that I would like to get addressed in home rule. And the first one is housing. And I would ask anybody here in a private conversation, are you happy with our housing stock in Zion in the direction that it's going? And I'm guessing everybody's going to say no. We have, I'm going to ask Director Ironson sometime before this, or maybe when this part of the meeting is over, just to get, if we still have that map on how many rental units we have in town, and put that up just so that people can look. It's startling, and if we could put it in the lobby, on how many rental units we have. Do we still have that map?
I don't believe we do, sir.
Oh, okay. But I think one of the things that I want to do is use the home rule powers, if we can, to give us more flexibility on housing. The other one is crime. We just put out the police department just put out something on Facebook that talked about the unprecedented amount of gunshots that have been happening in Zion. We're not happy with it. You're not happy with it. We understand that, and I think that the crime-free housing can be addressed, but it can also, when I'm going to get to my third issue here, if we can raise more revenue, I think then we can do more for our police force and get more officers out. Getting officers out isn't going to, we can have an officer on every, we can't put an officer on every corner. That'll never happen, but we can get more, and that's would be one of my priorities. And the revenue part, I think we talked about this through our budget hearings. We are, just so you understand, we started fiscal year 2017 and 18 with a $400,000 deficit. We are 4 months, 5 months, how far are we into this fiscal year? we're in the 5-month period on fiscal year 18 and 19, and we have a $750,000 deficit for this year that we have to cover. So we actually have approximately a $1.1 million deficit that we have to address. The thing that I favor on the home rule for revenue is increasing the sales tax by 1 or 1.5%. And a 1% increase in the sales tax would bring in approximately $2.2 million for the city. That would cover our deficit this year, and it would also, I think we have to think long-term. I don't want to just cover it for this year, and then expenses are going to keep going, and we're not going to have other revenue sources. If we do a sales tax, and that's what I would be in favor of. I would not be in favor of property taxes. I would not be in favor of, there's a lot of taxes listed on that list that are, they're not relevant to us. They're relevant to a larger city like Naperville. When you talk about transfer taxes and things like that, we don't sell that many homes that we're going to get a real estate transfer tax. But sales tax, it's not just going to be us. It's going to be everybody that comes into the hospital and stays here. It's going to be people that come in from out of town. It's going to be people that shop at Walmart. It's going to spread it. It's not just going to be on the backs of the Zion citizens. So that's my position on that's the only tax that I would be in favor of raising. And I know people are cynical. Carrie Lynn said there's not a lot of trust in government. I have promised that the information that we give out as a council will be factual. We're going to be open, and we're going to tell you the truth. We're going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly facts about where we are. And then it's going to be up to the citizens of our community to decide how we're going to solve it. We're trying to go forward. What I want to explain is how we got here. Because when I got elected, I said, I never thought I'd be doing this. And I'm just going to start. I'm going to go through a list of things that have happened in the last, most of them are in the last 10 years. But obviously the nuke plant closing down in 2008, and the housing crisis, or excuse me, the nuke plant closing down and the housing crisis in 2008 affected property values, which affected the dollars that come in on taxes for all the governments in the city. For Zion, for the city itself, the last 12 years, the police and fire pensions have risen from $1.2 million a year to $2.9 million annually. That's what we pay in police and fire pensions. I don't want to beat up on them. That comes out of Springfield. We have no control over that whatsoever. Our tax levy for property taxes is $7 million. $2.9 million of that is going to police and fire pensions. From 2009 to 2011, $8 million of city funds had been expended towards the development, legal costs, and contractual obligations for the Fielders project.
Yeah.
We don't need the theatrics. We wouldn't be in a financial hole right now that we are if we had that $8 million. We wouldn't be having to do any of this if that $8 million were there. In 2012, because of the Fielders project and the $8 million of city money, the city was not able to cover operating costs at that time. So a $2.5 million bond issue was floated to cover general operating expenses. And you got to understand that what happens now is that if this is like if you got a mortgage and you got a car payment and you've got all these payments that you have to make. You got to buy your food and your insurance and everything, and you get to the point where you can't cover that, so you go out and get a $20,000 loan to cover your expenses. Well, you cover your expenses for a little while, but when the $20,000 is gone and you haven't increased your revenue, you still have all those original costs, and now you have the interest that you're going to have to pay on that $20,000. So that's kicking the can down the road. And the annual debt service on this $2.5 million bond issue for operating expenses is $455,000 a year until 2022. So I said we have a $700,000 deficit $455,000 of it is going to a bond issue that was passed in 2012 to cover operating expenses. The Fielder's Agreement, which was signed by the city, obligated the city to pay taxes on the property, and the taxes on the property were $250,000 annually for a period of 25 years, and the city would not own the property at the end of that period of time. The city would not own the property, and the obligation, if you went $225,000 for 25 years, that's $6.2 million in taxes that the city would have had to pay on that property and not own it. So we purchased the property for $3.7 million to get out from underneath the tax obligation and at least own the property now. We are paying $300,000 a year to pay off the bond that we took out to buy the Fielder's property. So if you add up the $455,000 of the $2.5 million bond issue, the $300,000 that we're paying on the purchase of the Fielders, that's $755,000, which is our deficit this year. So that would still leave us $8 million that we would have if we weren't paying these. And the agreement to pay the taxes was signed over the objections of our city attorneys. There was a 2012 audit showed that the city did not pay into the police and fire pensions for 1 year to the tune of $1.8 million. So to make that up, the city paid $500,000 per year back to the pension funds between 2012 and 2015. And that, the extra earnings on that for a, it's the interest it's the earnings that they would have had if we had given them the $1.8 million, they invested, they would have had the earnings, we had to pay for the earnings too. So there are all these things that are sitting there, and now we're sitting on a $750,000 deficit for this year plus the $400,000 for last year, and the consequences of this. Director Neighbor, what's the percentage of our budget right now that our general operating budget that is personnel and benefits related? Do you remember that?
8% for salary benefits.
Yeah. We can't cut any more gas. We can't. We have to buy police cars. Now we get criticized because we bought some police cars, but they can't be out walking in the winter. So we're doing what we have to do, but we have no more operating expenses to cut. So we are trying to go with this. We're presenting this to the citizens, and it's up to you. And whatever you say, whatever the citizens of our community say, the chips will fall. Chips are going. They're flying, and how does that go? Chips will fall. They may. That's it. That's what I was trying to get out.
Because, Mayor, we're not likely to issue another bond.
No, we're not going to issue another bond to cover operating expenses. That's kicking the can down the road again. It's going to get us farther into debt and more trouble. And again, if we would have the opportunity to raise the sales tax, I would certainly recommend that we go higher than what we need right now to cover the deficit so that we're covered for a few years coming on. Now, we got a couple of, there's one other thing I would say. Everybody says, you got to bring in more business, get a Panera Bread, get a Chipotle, whatever. But we have some disadvantages here, and every single day, we're trying and we're talking to somebody to bring in a business. We have some disadvantages here because when a business when they're trying to make a decision on where they're going to look, this is where it is. They draw a circle around it and they do the demographics to see how much money is there and whether they can survive, and whether the demographics aren't just how much money. It can be cultural. It can be a lot of different things you're taking in there. Our problem is, we lose half our circle. The fish don't buy food. The fish don't buy cars. We got a lake over here and there's nobody living there. So when these places are looking at us, we've had Panera, we've talked to Panera. They're like, yeah, this ain't gonna work. We've talked to Starbucks. You guys don't meet our demographic. So we're trying to get that. Now, the thing I want to, and all I'm going to talk about is the city taxes here. I'm not going to talk about the school taxes or anything like that, but the expansion of the hospital, it was an $85 million project. $35 million of it was real property. So the other 50 million was personal property. It's beds, it's, MRIs, it's all the things that go into their personal property. $35 million was real property. The city, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we receive about $250,000 a year out of that project. Now, when people want us to bring in a Panera, or you want us to open a Dairy Queen again, I mean, we're still trying to do that, but that's spitting in the wind. If we're getting $250,000 a year out of a $35 million project, we have serious problems. My goal has been to try and hit a couple home runs, where the city can really get some money. And one of them is the medical marijuana cultivation center. That is it's still a possibility. It's in court. It should be settled in September. But again, that has not come through. The other one is the spent fuel rods, and that is pushing a heavy, heavy stone up a very steep hill. We've made some traction in Washington, D.C. There's a bill in the Appropriations Committee. Nothing's going to happen before the election in November, but we're still pushing it. If those things come through, we'll be great. I would love to give people money back. I'm not going to be here, but I would love to give money back to people. But that's what we're facing here, and that's why this is coming up. We don't have many choices, and if I'm going to cross the line here. If this does not pass and we don't have that ability, there will be cuts in services, I would say, like I've never seen here before. It will impact the entire community, and we don't want to do that. And if anybody has got any suggestions on what we can do with our budgets, you've talked about phones. We would be happy for you to come in and help us look at our phones. We've had 2 audits by companies that are looking at our phones, and we've done it twice, but we'll take any suggestions that somebody can have. I'm not going to the point where somebody suggested that all city workers are part-time. We're not going to do that. But anyway, okay, now, do you guys have any questions? And all I ask is that you raise your hand, let me call on you, and again, we're not going to get in a debate. This is not I'm against home rule, I'm for home rule. It's just, do you have a question that we can possibly answer? Yes, sir.
So, my question is...
Who are you asking? Are you asking our expert?
Everyone that's up here on the panel. So, how much do we give for the police and firefighters?
The average, and again, 2.9, well, it's $2.9 million.
2.9. Now, are all our firemen and policemen from Zion?
No, they're not.
I think that's a problem. You know what I'm just saying? I think that if someone works here, because you have to think.
Right, okay, that's a question. The answer is no, they're not. And I get that that's what you want to do, but you can do that during the next session.
Oh.
This is just answer questions on home rule.
Is there ever a time when a home rule becomes automatic, or can we always say yes or no?
If I believe if our population goes over 25,000 people, it's automatic.
And then you can't vote it back out after that?
You can still vote it out after that.
Margie? Yep.
I just wanted to know if you could make the information that you provided about the deficit available to everybody.
It'll be on the city's city council meeting, and it should be on tomorrow, Chris. It usually goes on the day after the city council meeting. You go to the city's website, you go to city council meetings, and then you go to agendas and minutes, and there's a video for this date, and you can watch the entire circus.
Have any of you done research on business being taken to neighboring communities when the sales tax is raised in home rule?
No, I haven't done that yet.
But the average, for example, a hotel room, one we have here in Zion, would add about $1 to a room night. So that's a 1% increase. It's not a significant increase, and I have read some research that when people want to purchase something in their local jewel, for example, they don't first think, well, I wonder what the sales tax is here as compared with over there, and decide on making a purchase that way. So what the research has demonstrated is it's not a major decision-making factor of whether you buy in this store or that store.
And I think to add to that point, the sales tax in Zion right now is 7%. The city gets 1%. The state takes the other 6%, and then they send 1% back to us. If we raised it 1%, it would be 8. I believe Waukegan's 8. Do you know what Gurnee is?
I think it might be 8.25.
8.25. So we're not going to be out of line with anybody around here, and we only get 1% of the 7%.
And I should also point out, I think, David, how much did they cut the LDGF? They gave us a haircut on the LDGF from the state, correct?
Well, it's proportionate based on when they increased the tax rates in the state, we were getting our same, instead of 10%, it's now like 8.25%, so they didn't basically share the wealth on that.
Yeah, basically the state
But they're
took a
constantly-
quote user fee.
Right. They're
Out of-
constantly
out of the local
looking
government
at that to
distribution
fill
fund.
their budget, so it's
Right.
always a risk that they put out there, or threat that they put out there saying, well, we don't have to give this out, we can just keep it.
Right. So we didn't get back as much as we thought we were.
Mr. McLemore?
One question was, you said something about fears. Can you give us a little bit about the fears that you said happened in other places that had home rule?
Well, the fears were that, first of all, the local governmental officials weren't going to be accountable for using the powers that they had in a way that the residents wanted them to. So, for example, if they would say, hey, we're not going to impose all these different taxes, we just want to impose this sales tax or whatever, and then the next thing you know, there was a wheel tax and amusement, all these other ones. So it's a fear that people are going to abuse their power, which is prevalent in many local governments.
And that was my other question. The change in this here, page 2, change the number of trustees in terms of office by ordinance. Can you expound on that a little bit?
So, well, I mean, some of the home rule powers that can, home rule was put in the Constitution originally to allow the residents to try to exercise more powers. And when Illinois set up governmental structures, there were 6 structures that, like 6 flavors of government that you can have. One is a council alderman, one is a commission form of government, one is a village trustee form of government. So what they're saying is that if you want to be able to say, hey, instead of having 5 trustees here or 5 members of the council, we want to have 10, they could do that.
Okay. So my question to you, Mr. Mayor, so just say if it got passed, so what, the commissioners are now going to be aldermen? And what happens with the Zion Township, because most of the commissioners are on their board too?
I would anticipate that it would stay the same.
Yeah, so
We
just.
don't have to change anything.
So they would be, okay,
This
so
would be just-
our commissioners would still be on the school board, school board.
Township.
Township board?
Right. We would stay a commission form of government. We would not become an automatic, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and the township is also still coterminous, so really, that wouldn't be impacted by home rule powers.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. The young lady said, you said that this home rule question is going to be on the voting referendum for us.
Yes.
She also stated that the best way to do it is to tell the voters what you plan on doing, raising the taxes. Is that going to be also be on there? How's word of mouth going to get out to the voters that this is what the city council plans on doing, raising taxes, our sales taxes by 1.5%?
Yeah, we will get that out. We will say this is our intent, and we will put that factual information out. It's going to be, I mean, I understand that the fear is that people's taxes are going to be raised. I understand that. I think people are primarily concerned that their property taxes are going to get raised, but they are concerned about all taxes. And I know that people are concerned about the sales tax also, but it's It's the one that we think can be spread, we can get help from other people. It's not all going to be on Zion people. It's going to be people that are shopping at Walmart. And what do they, well, never mind. I can't remember what else. We would get, how much do we get in sales tax from Walmart? We're supposed to be,
We
okay.
get between $400,000 and $500,000 a year.
We get between $400,000 and $500,000 a year in sales tax from Walmart. So a lot of that's from people from out of town. You know?
May I have one more question, please? I'm a little ignorant to this question. What is the Fielder's property, and what do we plan on doing with it since you purchased it?
Well, we wanted to purchase it so that we didn't end up paying, okay. What we would like to do is sell it. We want to get a developer in there, sell it to the developer, develop the property, collect taxes on that, collect sales tax on it. We don't, you know, I've read things about having festival parks and all that stuff out there, but, you know, we're bringing more baseball. And we have been approached by other baseball teams, and I tell them that, you know, if you guys want to use that, if you guys want that property, go ahead and build a stadium on it. And then you can rent it for us to cover our $300,000 a year that we have to pay off on our bond. And if a high school, somebody says, well, why don't you let the high school play out there? We would let the high school play out there, but if somebody comes along and wants to buy it in the middle of their season, we're selling it. We want to get rid of it. We don't want that. You know, we're talking about, we're doing something with Kmart tonight. Well, hopefully, all the properties that are sitting out there, we're working every day to bring somebody in, and we don't want to own them. And there was somebody said that there was something on Facebook, and I look at Facebook way too much. But there was something on there that said that the city owns 400 parcels of property, and why don't we sell them? And it's like, we don't own 400 parcels of property. And, I mean, we would certainly sell them. And what was the other one? The other one was, why doesn't the city sell a hospital to streets? We tried to sell the city hospital, or tried to sell a hospital, the streets around the hospital, a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, when they did their layoffs. They said, no, we're not interested in that, guys. We thought they'd want to take them and have a campus out there. That's where we were when we first started this. You know, we're going to sell streets. It's pretty crazy. Yes, ma'am.
So, Commissioner, you brought up a huge point about the liens. Because there was a property in Zion that I actually was interested in that I wanted to buy, but these taxes are through the roof, so I don't even know. But we just keep collecting on it, but there's no, you're never gonna get the money for that. The lady, I researched her, I looked for her. She's like in the wind, the old nursing home in Zion.
27th Street.
On 27th Street. And I guess she was gonna do a vet center or something. She was partnered with someone. I found him. He said she's in the wind somewhere. But we're steady collecting on that property, and we can't get rid of it. So that is also affecting the debt like that.
Right, we are, and that's what we hope, that some of this will help us be able to move on some of those things.
But when do we say, okay, this property's been sitting, it's boarded up, people keep busting windows, it's not pretty outside, like, nothing about it is.
All right, wait, we gotta take this to comments.
Yeah. Well, no,
Citizen comments. This isn't part of the question on home rule.
It is, because we're talking about the liens, and we're talking about, because I didn't sign up, okay.
If I understand it correctly, it would expedite the process that we would have to go through to acquire the property so we could tear it down. Right now, there's litigation after litigation for the city to acquire property like that. Trying to find the owner is a big deal.
It is.
Which we continue to do.
And keep in mind that if we get the property and if we have to buy it, and then we got to tear, no, if we take the property, then we got to tear it down. And that's expensive stuff.
Yeah.
Mr. Monk.
Question to the attorney. Does the Dillon rule limit the authority of the municipality?
It limits authority of a non-home rule municipality, yes. So Dillon's rule is you can only exercise powers that it says you can exercise. So if you are non-home rule, you have to be able to point to a law that says you can do something. Home rule is the inverse of that. You can do something unless it says you can't.
Mr. Bremner.
First, excuse
Excuse me. Thank you, young lady, for your presentation.
Yes.
I have two questions. You mentioned that there could be no campaigning as such by governmental unit. Should the city put out information about home rule and saying these are the good things, A, B, C, D, whatever it is, would the city also be required to, on that same presentation, say these are the negative parts of home rule, A, B, C, or E, F, G, H?
Good question. So the city can't advocate for or against home rule. It can only give out information. So if some of the information is a negative consequence, but it's factual, they can still give that out. They just can't say vote yes or vote no.
I understand that, but can they ignore the negative consequences while emphasizing the positive consequences?
They can do that as long as they're not expending public funds to do that.
All right. My second question, how does home rule affect the other 18, 19 taxing, how many, 19 taxing bodies? How does it affect the other 19 taxing bodies on my real estate taxes?
It does not impact them because it would only apply to the city. So they still have, I mean, the school district is still going to impose its tax, and the park district and the library district, that's not impacted by this.
Right, but they're not granted any extra taxing authority.
No,
It's
it
just the
would
city.
only go to the city.
Thank you.
Margie?
Does it affect, like the TIF districts or properties, is that affected by the home rule in any kind of way?
I think so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Our TIF.
TIF, no, TIF districts wouldn't be impacted by that.
No impact on either.
Do you think that raising the sales tax would be a deterrent for bringing businesses in, or is it, I mean, that would make sense to me that if it's gonna fit us, they would look at that and say, yeah, but I'm not gonna consider you because you raised your sales tax and it's now this much.
Yeah, I wouldn't, my opinion, I wouldn't think so because our surrounding communities are higher. They're higher than, they're as high as we would go to or higher. Yeah, but it might, I don't know. I'm not a businessman, I guess you'd have to ask Mr. Whitmore behind you. Would that affect you, Roger?
I don't think so. It'd be minimal, to say the least. If it's 1% more, I think 1% would get us out of the woods. But while I'm up, I might ask a question to the council. Mayor, I hope you're still going to be here someday, Mr. Mayor. But are we willing to do the hard part? If we raise these funds, we get the tax increase 1.5%, we get the $2.2 million. Are you still prepared to do the hard part and lean out some of the fat in the city?
Say that again. Get rid of
Well,
it.
I don't, you'll have to share with me, and I don't want to do it right now, but you'll have to share with me what you mean by the fat in the city.
Well, I just think there's areas that we can save money. If you're in a business, you don't have the money. If I didn't have the money, I'd have to eliminate some things in my business.
Right, and that's what we're doing. We have eliminated, I'll share this with you. It's not that we haven't been doing that. This goes in 2008. And much of it is people. In 2008, they're our most expensive, that's the biggest expense in the city, is our personnel. Public Affairs had 3 people in 2008, they have 3 in 2018. Finance had 7 in 2008, they have 4 in 2018. Building Department had 10 in 2008, 7 in 2018. Economic Development had 3 in 2008, 1 in 2018. Fire had 27 in 2008, they have 28 in 2018. The Police had 66 in 2008, they have 52 today. We're down 14 policemen. Public Works had 27, they're down to 23. So we've gone from 143 employees to 120 employees in 10 years. So we've been cutting back. Now, you are welcome to, and truly welcome to come and look at our budgets. We don't have any more operating expenses that we can cut. We could stop buying coffee. I guess we could do that, and that'll save us a couple $100 a year, but it's beyond that. But yes, we would, Mr. Whitmore. I guess it's my philosophy that I think we try and do that every day.
Thank you.
Wait a minute, there's, Donna.
Okay, my question is, should the community vote to put home rule in place, can the community, if not happy with it, is there a process or a way of rolling it back?
She talked about that earlier. To me, there are two ways. There can be a referendum initiated to replace home rule, or you can get new commissioners. You vote these people out, you vote them out of office. And this is, you can't vote people out of office any easier than you can the local official. It's a whole lot easier to get Mr. Madigan, or a whole lot more difficult to get Mr. Madigan out of office than it is to get Mr. Hill out of office.
Yeah, it is.
So, you always have that power. And I think that if the city council would abuse the intention that we will be stating on what we want to use home rule power for, if we abuse it, you hold us responsible. You hold our feet to the fire.
So how is that initiated?
They were talking about that. You have to go to the clerk, and I'm assuming you'd have to get petitions, put it on the ballot, but it's easier just to vote us out of office. We're not debating yet.
I'm not.
Okay.
How many years are the commissioners on?
4.
Okay.
4-year
How many
term.
years is the mayor?
4. Oh, this mayor's got about 5 more months, 6 more months.
Just in general, how long
4.
are your terms?
Everybody's 4-year terms.
Okay. So, 4 years.
But they're alternating terms.
Alternating every 2
They're
years.
alternating every 2 years. There's
Yeah,
3 up,
basically-
1.
Yeah.
And
You have a chance to change half the city council every 2 years.
2 years.
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to make a statement. If any dealings I've had with you, Mr. Mayor, and the commissioners, I fully in my heart believe that you guys have what is the best interest of the city in mind with what you're doing. That being said, my concern is that you already said you're not going to be here anymore. So after you're gone, it could open up another whole can of worms unless you change your mind to something.
well, I guess I would say that behooves you as citizens and you as an electorate to pick people, to evaluate them, and pick people that you trust. And I know a lot of people think that a lot of this is popularity contest, and perhaps it is kind of. But when I was standing up in this parking lot every day during early voting, and one of the candidates running against me said, yeah, this is just popularity contest. Because he would go up and say something to people, and they would say, well, I'm voting for Al. And he'd say something, oh, it's just a popularity contest. And again, maybe it is, but it's popularity contest because I've been in this community for 32 years. I coached their kids. I coached them in hockey. I coached them in softball. They got to know me. I worked at the Park District for years. They knew that I was going to be straightforward, and if I may make stupid decisions sometimes, but you're going to know that what they are. And I think that the council that we have right now is everybody's working for the best interest of the city. I don't wake up in the morning. These people don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can we go and mess up the people of Zion? How can we screw this up? We do make mistakes, and sometimes we screw things up, but we're here working for the benefit of everybody in this community. We're not getting anything out of this. Except beating up around the head and chest every now and then, but so Mary Lou, I say it's up to you. You have to be concerned about, that applies to every other board in this community, the school boards, the Park District, every other one. It's up to you. When there was an article in the Tribune and they were talking about taxes, and when you're pointing your finger at somebody about taxes, you need to take that finger and point it back at yourself, because you elected the people that are raising your taxes. And it's up to you. So anyway, are there any more questions? We're not, we still got public comments to go. Clyde?
I just, on this home rule, back on the gym. First of all, I want to say, what you just said made a whole lot of sense. I mean,
Would you edit that out and get him saying that, and I'm gonna put it in I'm gonna put it up somewhere, man.
you made a whole lot of sense. But my thing of it is, I like home rule, but I like for our commissioners to be part of the community. That's why I like automatic. They break it off into precincts, and they run from their precinct that they live in. They're more compatible in the community. Everybody, all y'all, besides Mr. McKinley, y'all live in the same neighborhood. You don't even want to live over in our neighborhood. You know what I'm saying?
That's not true.
I'm just saying in general. I'm looking for the.
Right, I understand, I understand what you're saying, but that's not part of our discussion just yet. But I would tell you this too. I worked in a community up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, that had 13 aldermen. The city was about 14,000 people. It had 13 aldermanic districts, and you couldn't get anything done because it was all trading. It was horse trading, because if I wanted something if I wanted you to spend $20,000 in my ward, well then $20,000 better go to his ward, and $20,000 better go to that ward. It's the same thing that's in Chicago. If you have dedicated people who are interested in the entire community, and they're all looking out for it doesn't make any difference if something, if it goes to in Billy's neighborhood or Lloyd's neighborhood or Chris's neighborhood and Mike and I's neighborhood. We're looking we're trying to prioritize what's best and for the entire city. And when you start fighting over all our wards, it was ugly. And I think it gets ugly in Chicago, and I think there's a lot of waste when you start governing that way instead of for the whole city. But anyway, are there any more questions? All right, I'm going to, for those of you that do not want to stay for the rest of the city council meeting, I'm going to give you, we're going to take a 1-minute break so you can leave. And Rich, did you have that? Did you find that, Matt?
No.
So I'll call the meeting back to order in about 1 minute.
Yeah.